What's up, y'all? This is Jake Ferguson, and thanks so much for tuning in. So today I'm going to be taking you through how to do some stylized animation in C4D, as well as compositing in After Effects. Our final product is going to be this very cool animated loop that looks very flat, very anime. So I'm going to be taking you through some of the steps that I take within C4D, within Zbrush, and After Effects in order to get a very flat render out of something that's completely three-dimensional. So this is going to be the final product that we get to by the end of the demo. Pretty cool, right? It took me a while to kind of crack this code and figure out how to get this result out of C4D. You know, there are some cell animated aspects in there, but that's 99% cinema that you're seeing. So, you know, a little about me before we really get into this. I'm a freelance art director and CG lead based in Los Angeles. I have worked at Imaginary Forces, Elastic, The Mill, Carbon VFX, MTV. I used to be staff at Otoy, so shout out to all the Octane guys. Hello. You know, I mostly focus on CG title sequences and commercial work. I've worked on some features, you know, but mostly titles. That's what I like to do the most. I actually have an Emmy for main title design in 2018. So shout out to Karen Fong for bringing me on to such a cool project and being such a noble leader, as always. I could ramble about myself for a while, you know, but for the sake of time, I'm just gonna show you guys my reel, and maybe that will, you know, help you see what exactly I'm about. So in the demo today, I'm going to be taking you through posing, sculpting, texturing, and compositing in order to get this final result. So we're going to get there by, you know, starting with a couple pre-made assets and manipulating them to suit our needs, and then we're going to, you know, take our own, you know, means of stylization and get to exactly where we're going. So I'm going to take you through just my general practice, a little bit of theory in each of these packages, and just generally how to, you know, cut corners and get somewhere kind of quickly in order to get the result that you want without too much frustration or manual labor or anything like that. So thanks again for tuning in. So the first thing we're going to do is get that pose down. So we have our reference of the character, and we want to match this pose in 3D, you know, as fast as possible. We don't want to make this from scratch. We don't want to do anything like that, especially when there's so many good rigged characters online everywhere. So the director actually found a pretty stylized model, which he sent me an FBX of. So it looks like you're just like typical stylized anime female character. Now the geometry right now is not really something we should focus on. We're really focusing here on how to, you know, get the pose down, you know, because we're going to bring her into Zbrush afterwards and really start, you know, sculpting her out to match the artwork. So the first thing that we want to do is start off with the pelvis, and this is kind of the key element here. You know, you start here and then work your way up and then work your way down. That's usually how I do posing. So I'll start off with the bigger things first, like, you know, the pelvis, then the spine, then the shoulders, elbows, wrists, hands, fingers. That way you're doing your big, you know, silhouettes first, And then you work into some of the fine details. We're gonna start with the thigh here. And just kind of swing that down. Now it looks like she's got kind of a arc to her hips like that. So we're gonna start there. We're gonna start on the pelvis first. And I know it looks weird, but we're gonna, you know, just kind of do something that looks a little counterintuitive right now by twisting the pelvis to match this alignment. So you can see this point here and this point here are the widest part of the hip. So they make that type of angle. So we're just gonna match that same thing and do something like that. And then we're gonna start, you know, we can start with the legs because they'll be a little bit easier to get down. We're gonna start matching those. You just swing those over. Let's see, where's the other one? Here. And bring that down. I know it looks a little weird, but you just have to trust me. We're gonna fix a lot of this in Zbrush when we make our way over there. Okay, and do the knee. Looks like your leg's back a little bit, like that. Now, your ball and socket joints, you know, feel free to swing around on any axis, but you gotta make sure that whenever you're doing hinge joints, like your knees and elbows, you're only using the one axis like that, because, you know, that's not how a leg bends. That being said, this is really stylized, so it's like, you know, if you're in a pinch and that's the only way to make it look right, go right ahead. You know, rules are there to be broken. So we're gonna bring this leg out a little bit and bring the calf down. Bend her foot down because she's floating. Not something too weird, kind of like that. And do the same thing with the toes, so her foot's a little flatter. Okay, and let's do her other foot. You're not gonna really see her other foot, so it doesn't matter too much. That's good. Yeah, looks great. So let's keep going. So what we're gonna do is just kind of start bringing the spine in a little bit. Doesn't matter too much. You know, you can start pushing some of this stuff. She's a static piece of geo, so it doesn't really matter if we start to displace her bones a little bit just to like get that pose going. Looks like she has a little bit of a twist to her chest, so we can start probably on a lower one like this. Let's see. So it looks like her shoulders have a cool angle to them like that. We want to preserve that because what it's doing is it's creating an angle here and here. So these two different angles are kind of working against each other, which adds to the, you know, artistic value of the pose. And that's what we're gonna match. So we'll worry about her neck afterwards. I'm just gonna kind of skew her head. Oh, it's so weird. Her shoulders are attached to her neck bone. If I had a nickel for every weird rig that I had to make work, I would have quite a few nickels. So looks like her clavicle is actually under her neck joint. So we're gonna start there on her left clavicle. That's her shoulder, her collarbone right there. And that's where we're gonna get the general angle for her shoulders, like that. Now, your clavicle is kind of a free moving joint, so it works if you do something like that. And then we're gonna do the opposite with the other one so that we can get that cool angle. Let me just kind of move it around like that. Yeah. And there, we're gonna bring her arm up like that. And kind of compensate a little bit with the shoulder blade, or with the clavicle. Continue with that arm. Now we don't want to twist it too much because you see it starts pinching the geo, and it'll be easier just to get the shape in there like that. Okay, and take the forearm. Now, normally you can't really twist this, but we're gonna do it anyway. Just to kind of help her hand out a little bit when we get there, so we can get to the hand and twist that around. So her finger pose is actually pretty decent. I don't really see a reason to mess with it too much. So let's move down to her other hand. See, we're getting a little bit of a pinch there, but you know, it's all right. We'll fix it when we get into the sculpting phase. So now we're gonna do her other arm. Left clavicle. So looks like we got that angle pretty good in there. We can mess with a little bit more later. Then we're gonna get this arm out. It looks like this arm is pushed a little bit back behind her so that we can't see her elbow too much, like it's a little tucked in. And her elbow is straight out like that. And that's what we want to match. Do a little twist, and then take her forearm, and we're gonna do the same thing that we shouldn't be doing. We're gonna break that forearm and bend it a little bit, just to help her hand out and keep her wrist smooth. Bend her hand up like this, and that's pretty decent for now, you know? Do a little bit of adjustment on her legs, go back down and do those. So where are they? Take this thigh and move it in over a little bit, and then take this one and move it in a lot. So it looks like it's kind of in. All right, not perfect, but it's close, you know, and all we really need for this phase is close. All right, so that's pretty much good for her body for now. We'll mess with it more later. We should fix her hair up a little bit, just so that I think it's these. Let's see. Nope, that's not it. Oh, it's probably gonna be in her head. So go to her head bone. Yeah, we should pose that as well. Let's see. So it looks like she's kind of looking up a little bit. She's looking at the crystal, so we should kind of pose ourselves here and make sure that that kind of aligns, but also that it's not too far back that it doesn't look strange from the front, because this is what's most important. So yes, she's looking at it, but yes, her head's sloped a little too far back, so we're just gonna, you know, adjust so that it looks best from the front. Okay, good enough. And let's see, here we go, mirrored. So this is probably her pigtails. So we're gonna move these over to match that other piece of artwork. Let's see, that was provided as reference. This one. All right. So it looks like they're just out and they bend. So obviously the pigtails that we have in this model, they're not ideal, you know. They're a lot shorter, they don't have as many bends, but we're gonna fix a ton of that in the sculpting phase, so that won't be an issue at all. We just need to get the general, you know, we just need to get them away from the head, so because we're gonna split those out. So the pose here doesn't really matter too much because we're gonna change them so much, so we need to get them, push them away, kind of like that, because we're gonna eventually make these their own object when we get to the sculpting phase. And then we'll do the other one. This one, okay. Move that over. Great. Okay, cool. So let's move over to Zbrush. So during this section, I'm going to show a time lapse of the sculpting process within Zbrush, and at the same time, I'm going to kind of talk through how to achieve some of those same things within C4D and the sculpting tools here. So in your layout section in the top right, you can change it to sculpt, and it'll give you a ton of tools that you can use to achieve kind of the same things. You know, in Zbrush, I'm really only using, you know, pushes, pulls, smoothing, a little bit of masking, and a little bit of topology management, you know, and a lot of those things you can do here. So for the smoothing, you know, I use the smooth brush to take out, you know, areas like this. You know, you can just run it over, and it's like these kind of creases and everything to just like kind of reduce the detail and get a smoother mesh to, you know, just give us something easier to work with and stylize it how we want to stylize it. You know, it's like a lot of these just unnecessary details, and you can use the flatten tool as well. Now it's a little too flat, so you can go into your pressure here and lower that, and that'll kind of give you, still a little too much. Drop it a little bit more, even more than that. There you go. Something kind of like that, you know, and that's how you can start to go in and just start, you know, getting that stuff. I personally use Zbrush for just about everything. I'm way more comfortable in it. I have years of experience using it, so that's my go-to. But the sculpting tools within C4D are fantastic, and you can do just about anything in here that you would want to be able to do in there. So, you know, it's like I'm using a lot of these tools as well. The grab tool is something that's really good. You can just use it to, you know, quickly start to reposition things exactly how you want to get, you know, more of a finessed model to match, you know, the things that you want to do. The same thing with the pull tool. It'll just pull stuff towards you, you know, or if you hold down control, it'll push things away from you. It becomes a push tool. So that's super handy. There's a subdivide feature if you need more geometry. You know, a ton of these tools are great. You know, the inflate tool will help you with things like the hair. You know, if I want to inflate certain sections of it and deflate others. Now, keep in mind you hold down control and any brush that you have will do the opposite. So pretty much what I'm doing here in Zbrush, you know, I've gone through and smoothed out the whole model and created a mesh that matches the design boards that I'm going off of a lot more. And, you know, it's created, you know, a much thinner, you know, more stylized anatomy than what I originally had. And I'm going in and replacing certain sections like the hands, and creating new sculpts for the hands and putting it onto my stylized model. That way I can preserve the detail there, and, you know, the same thing with the head or whatever else I need. So for these sections, you know, I'm creating a very high subdiv model that I can later go into Cinema and start to stylize the topology to make something more low poly and ready to project our textures onto. All right, we're back in Cinema. So now her geo, you know, it's smooth and it works, but it doesn't really match the look of, you know, her body here. And when we do our projection, you know, the silhouette, it's gonna have this nice angular lighting, but the silhouette's gonna be super curvy the way that we have it. So what we're gonna do is do a quick polygon reduction on the body itself, and also do one on the hair. All right, so we're gonna do a quick polygon reduction on the body and then also do one on the hair. So I'm gonna do an alt click on a poly reduction, and it's gonna process the polygons. Okay. And we're gonna crank that number up. By default, it's 90. We're gonna try 99.5. So still a little too many. Let's try 99.9. That's better. But look at those hands. Oh no. The body looks great, but the hands are all screwed up again. All right, so turn that off for a sec. Bring the geo down. We're gonna split our hands out again. So I'm just gonna use our lasso tool. Select the hands, right click, split. Go to our original geo, delete. So now we have our body and our hands as two separate objects. So we can do two separate polygon reductions. So that the body works on this. So we're gonna turn that back on. Very cool. So let's, yep, that works. Head's kind of messed up. We might do the same process to the head that we did the hands. But yeah, this looks good. This looks like a nice like vector that somebody would draw. So what are we using on there? 99.9. It even kind of, you know, the chest, it matches that same shape that is being used in the lighting. So, you know, we know that's a good count if that's how it lines up. That's great. So we're gonna do the same thing to the hair. Do an alt click on that, let it process. Do a 99.9. Too much. Let's try a 99.5. That's cool. That looks really awesome. All right, that works. That's cool. And then for the hands, we got to do those as well. So the hands are kind of a key moment with the camera. We're this close, so we're gonna wanna make sure that those both look legible, but still, you know, very stylized. I'll click, let it process. 99. Close. A little intense, but that might actually work out just fine. What does 99 or 98.5 looks like? That's a little better. Let's do that. Let's do 98.5 on there, just so we have a little bit more wiggle room. Okay, so now we have these polygon reductions. We're just gonna hit C and make all this into our editable geo, but we're gonna keep it separate. All right, now we should do our projection. So now that we have our stylized model, we're gonna just do like a centered cam. I'm gonna do a PSR reset on it so it's perfectly facing the model. And we're going to use this to project the body. So let's get rid of these textures. I'm gonna make a new one. By double clicking, and I'm gonna go to my color. I'm gonna just leave all this the same for now, just so I can see what I'm doing. So now I'm gonna bring in her body drawing right here, and I'm gonna just put that on the body, and I'm gonna set this to camera and plug our camera in here. And to see what I'm doing, I'm gonna also change my viewport resolution to something a lot higher, so we can start figuring out exactly what's on there. So it looks like it's close, but it's not really lining up perfectly. I'm gonna change my camera to match what the drawing was done in. I think the drawing was done in an early model in Zbrush, and the focal length in Zbrush is set to 50, so I'm gonna set my projection camera to 50 also. See. All right. Looks like it's a little squished. So what we're gonna do is go to our coordinates and change our camera scale to 1.4. That should match a little better. There we go. And now we're just gonna kind of line the edges up like that. Cool. Looks great. So that's our lighting on our character, right there. Looks a little wacky, but it works. So I'm gonna look through the camera and just make sure that lines up exactly like I want it to. Got a little foot right here, chest. Cool. Now, the hands are blacked out, and so is the face on that drawing, so we're gonna have to do those on our own. For the shader now, I'm gonna take this off of color, and I'm gonna drag it into luminance and put it on here. I'm gonna turn off color, turn luminance on, turn off reflectance, and bam, we have a flat character. That looks cool. Let's clean this up a little bit first, because like obviously the projection has some issues. It has stuff that goes through, like this foot shouldn't be so lit up, these little issues right here. So since we have this low poly model, we can just select all the problemed polygons like that. Here, anything that doesn't look, you know, correct, you can just select those guys. Like all that works fine. And what we're gonna do is, we're never gonna see her back, so it doesn't really matter that we're doing this. All right. Now that you have those polys selected, what you want to do is you can make a new shader and just turn off color, turn off reflectance, and you have a flat black shader. And we're going to apply those to the model, and it's going to get rid of those problemed aspects. So if you see any more, you know, that you didn't hit the first time, it's fine. Just go in and put it back on. So we're going to do that for points that we want to be black, and we're going to do that for points that we want to be white as well. So I'm going to go back and use my selection tool because it's a little bit faster. Grab this whole foot because we know we want that to all be black. Back of her leg. Let's see. Cyber foot. Whatever that And yeah, cool. So now we're gonna do the same thing, but with a white shader. So for that, it's a little bit different. Turn color off, turn reflectance off, turn luminance on. And it looks like our white is not what the value of the drawing that we're projecting is. So we're gonna select that as a color so we get this gray that matches. And we're gonna go in and select what we want to be white. So let's see. We know there's a rim light on her arm coming in from the crystal. So we're gonna do that. Let's see how intense that is. It should match up fine. All right, cool. So now we got her arm all fixed up. So let's do her hands now. Her hands are something we're gonna have to do by hand. So, no pun intended. So we're gonna just kind of hit the polygons that are gonna be hit by this top lighting that's lighting the rest of her body. Enough so that we can just highlight the fingers and differentiate them from the rest of the silhouette when we're that close with our camera. Okay, cool. That should do it, honestly. There you go. Bam, that works pretty well. We got a few little stray polys that looks like it belongs to the body. Grab those. Hit it with the white shader. Okay. Done. Sweet. So yeah, she looks pretty cool, you know? It's like, that's some very stylized lighting that would be a nightmare to get with Sketch and Tune and also with actual lighting, but this is just a cheap way to do it with polygons. If your light doesn't move, like, why not, you know? So the hair is just gonna be flat black, easy, doesn't have any highlights. We just need the shape. And now her face, we gotta project that on there. So we're gonna do a new shader, put it on her head, and we're gonna do the same thing that we did for the body. We're gonna grab the front projection of her head, and we're gonna make a new camera. I actually wanna look through it so I can line it up with her face. And I'm going to change the projection to camera and put the camera in right there. And change our viewport size to 4K so we can see what we're doing, and we're gonna start figuring this out. So this is just kind of generally the angle that we're gonna project down onto. We're gonna have to twist the camera a little bit to match a little bit better. We're gonna also change the scale. So that's pretty good to get it set up initially. I'm gonna hide my other camera so I can see okay. Looks really screwy from the side, but we're gonna start fixing that. So we're gonna do the same thing that we did to the body. We're gonna change the scale of the camera to 1.4 so she's not so stretched out. That's gonna cause us to push in a little bit. Look at that, it's already working out pretty well. Cool. At least from the front. So we're gonna kind of match, you know, where her nose is, like that. Bring up something like that. Now the scale looks a little off. We might need to go in and do a little special geometry treatment on her chin, but for the most part this works out pretty well, especially when it's going to be flat. So to do that, we're going to do the same thing we did with the body. We're going to take that color projection, move it on to luminance, turn luminance on, turn color off, turn reflectance off. Now it looks like her head was painted white while her body was painted gray. We want these to match. So I'm gonna do a layer, and I'm going to go into there and add a color channel and match that same gray, and I'm gonna multiply it over the whole thing. So her face should match the body. Yeah, that matches pretty well. Cool. Okay, great. So now let's see how we look from the front. I'm gonna make just a default camera, PSR, just so that it's facing our model. Just kind of get the same framing that's in the board. I mean, that's not bad, you know? It's like, that's pretty damn close to what we're going for. All right, we gotta hit this hand too, but not by much, just a little bit. Just the top of her arm there. But we'll get back to that. So now we just gotta kind of clean up her face like this. I'm gonna take that camera that we project her head on, and I'm gonna start moving around based off of this angle so that I can kind of get a better sense of this. Move it over a little bit. I'm just trying to kind of neutralize the shadow on the right side of her face. Just see what works out the best. Ah, that's cool. Yeah, that's it right there. Okay, so we're gonna leave that be. Hide that camera. This looks great. So now I'm gonna jump out of the camera. I'm gonna go under her face, and I'm gonna do that same poly fix that we did on her body. Grab all these guys. Grab back here. Back of her head. So it looks like right here kind of cuts into her face. Not a problem. It looks like it'll go with the rest of the drawing. I think it'll be totally fine, especially from our point of view over here. That looks good. So now let's do our camera move. So now that we have our model set up, we should do our camera move, and then, you know, get the crystal and the background in there, and then we can comp. So the camera move, you know, it's an orbit around the model and the background, but that's a lot of keyframes that we don't really need to deal with. Instead, we're gonna spin the model and the background at the same rate, and we're just gonna pull back the camera with a camera morph. Keep it much simpler. So we have our model. This will be our kind of B position where we want to end up. So let's call that cam B. And now let's do an A position, cam A, where we're just a lot closer on the hand, and eventually where the crystal's gonna be. So it's gonna be something kind of like this, but she's on an axis right in the middle like that, but her hand is not, you know. So when we spin her hand's gonna be in a different place than the rest of her body. So what we wanna do is we wanna actually create a new null and put her in it to do this rotation. We'll call this shells rot for rotation. And I'm gonna go to my overview camera, top, and I'm going to actually line up the axis with her hand, like that. So that way when she spins, change it back to perspective, when she spins, she doesn't spin around, you know, her foot or anything, she actually spins around where her hand is, so that it always stays in the same place, and so does the crystal. So that's exactly what we want to do. So for camera A, I'm going to actually just center that with the hand, something like that, kind of put it towards the bottom. And now we're going to do her rotation. So this shot is actually only 56 frames long, but I'm going to keep the timeline at 120 at 24 FPS, just so that we have some extra room and we can do some cool timer mapping later. So this isn't a good starting position because it's not an ideal look at her hand. So we're going to actually set a keyframe at the 120-second mark for the rotation on her body, so that at the end it's at this position. But in the beginning, we're gonna spin her like this. See, her hand looks way cooler like that. We're gonna set a keyframe there. And we're gonna actually move this camera up just a little bit, like that. Now, I was lucky enough to find a pretty cool crystal online, and I just ran a polygon reduction on it. So I'm gonna bring that in. Okay, there we go. Crystal's pretty cool, nice and low poly. We're gonna texture it a little bit differently than we were doing shells, so I'm gonna just raise that up just a little bit, and I'm gonna put that crystal in the rotation that shells is in so that they move together. Sweet. Okay, cool. So she doesn't have that much of a rotation going on, you know? It's like she's just kind of flipping from like a side view to a front view. Now, to get our camera to move between these two cameras, we're gonna make a third camera, and it doesn't really matter the position, I'll just do a PSR on it, and we're gonna set the tag on there to a camera morph, which is one of my favorite functions in C4D of all time. So we're gonna use cam A as our first position, camera 1, and cam B as our second position. So all we have to do is set the blend from 0% on the first keyframe to 100% on the back keyframe, and we have our camera move, and that's it. So you should look through that and test it out. I'm gonna hide the other two cameras. Nice, not bad. A bit slow and drawn out, but that's our move generally. So that's good. We got our character, we got our crystal, now we just need the background. So if we look at the reference, the background is split up into a few layers. We have the color all the way in the back, we have this middle row of guys, and we have this front row of guys. So we're gonna need to go in there and split that out. I've already done that, and I split out the 3 different layers with alpha, and that's what we're gonna bring into Cinema. So I'm just gonna go out of my camera right now and make a cylinder. Let's see, just do something like that and make it editable. And then I'm gonna cut off the top and the bottom so that we just have this tube. And that's what we're gonna use to put the background on. So I'm just gonna make a new texture, apply it, turn on my luminance channel, turn everything else off, and I'm going to add in the first layer here. Now I'm gonna just pull that over to alpha and put that on there. Check alpha on, and I'm gonna change my viewport texture size to 4K. Cool. So that looks like it works. Now we just need to offset our mapping a little bit so that we basically, wherever we end up at the end, we just want to match that design board. So we're gonna go into our camera, and we want to just make it so that the background fits. So what we're gonna do is just offset our horizontal mapping a little bit and our vertical mapping so that we can just start to get that same kind of look in there. Move our cylinder down a little bit. Let's see how that works. So this is the other thing that we want to do. Our background cylinders, since the camera's not actually rotating and the character is, we're just gonna take that and put it in her rotation so that, there you go. You get a pretty cool orbit. So our camera's not orbiting, but you get the illusion of it because the background's spinning at the same rate of the character. So that works. So to do the other layers, I'm gonna change this to perspective. To do the other layers of the background, I'm just gonna duplicate that cylinder, stretch it out a little bit so that we get these 3 layers of parallax basically. And for the middle one, let's see. I'm gonna make a copy of the same texture. I'm just gonna change my luminance to the second layer and push that over to my alpha as well. And then I'm just gonna copy that onto that cylinder, and then I'm gonna repeat the same thing for the third layer. I'm gonna go to my luminance, change that to the third layer, and I'm gonna just check my alpha off because that's that doesn't have any alpha information. It's just a solid, oops, wrong one. It's just a solid piece like that. So let's go in our camera and just see how that lines up. You know, it's pretty close already. We just need to make a few adjustments to this back cylinder. Let's see, so we're gonna rotate that a little bit. Gonna bring it down, something like that. We're gonna also just offset our vertical mapping a little bit so we can just fit some more detail into our constraints. Okay. Yeah, something like that works. Maybe a little bit more. That's cool. Okay, and then we're gonna do the same thing for our background. So we may basically just want to get like these eyes in the bottom of the gradient in. So I'm just gonna pinch my vertical mapping down a little bit, adjust the cylinder, maybe stretch it out a little bit more, pull it up like that. So that's cool. That works. All right, so we're gonna group these cylinders, call that BG. So that background that we're seeing is the same color, basically, as what we're seeing in that last layer of the background cylinders that we made. So I'm gonna keep that turned off. Now we're not getting much light on the crystal because it doesn't have a texture. So I'm gonna make just a default glossy texture and put it on the crystal. And then I'm gonna go in, nothing really matters except for your index. I'm just gonna drop that all the way down. And that's gonna make it a perfectly chrome material like that. Now I just need to render each piece. And by doing so, I'm going to render shells by herself, just like this. And then I'm going to turn her off, render the crystal by itself. And then I'm gonna turn crystal and the shells off and just render the background on a layer by itself. And once we have those image sequences, we'll be ready to comp. All right, so now we have all three of these image sequences in here and it looks pretty good. So we just wanna push it into a much more stylized direction to match our design board, which I'm going to park. Yeah, right there's fine. Open it up just a little bit. So it looks like, you know, the biggest differences between this board and our render is we need that glow on top. We need a little bit of color on shells. We need to, you know, change her grays to something else. We need the crystal to be a little brighter, you know, towards the end, and just, you know, the background should feel more secondary and not necessarily as imposing as it does here. So let's get right into it. The first thing that we should do is treat the background. So I'm gonna put it out of focus first. That's gonna be our first move. I'm going to use FL out of focus, and that's from the Frisch Luft package. I love this blur. It's just like camera lens blur, but it renders faster, which is fantastic. So I'm gonna keyframe this actually. I'm gonna do something pretty high on the beginning. Maybe like, it stops at 50, but for 4K it should be a little higher. I'm gonna do 80. That looks good. 90, just to push it over the edge. Cool. Keyframe it there, and then by the time we get about here-ish, yeah, something like that, I'm gonna set it back down to 0. So that's when our background comes into focus. So already, you know, it's like we're starting to set up a little bit more of a cinematic language than what's already there. Secondly, we're going to treat shells. So this is a little bit more simple. I'm gonna solo her just so that we can focus on her. And I'm gonna split her into 2 layers. Her first layer, I'm just gonna do a fill on her. And I'm gonna make that, let's see, I'm gonna pull her darkest purple from here. Yeah, something like that. You know, we can always change it if it's too light. And then the second layer, I'm gonna do a Luma key, and I'm gonna get rid of the darks on that. So what that's gonna do is pretty much just put her highlights and her darks into 2 layers. Cool, okay, so that's split up. Now for shells, I'm going to actually put a gradient ramp on her. and just use a normal linear gradient ramp that it comes out with. I'm going to swap the colors so that the bright spot's up here, pull it down a little bit. I'm going to leave that top part white, and then the bottom part I'm actually going to make pink. See, she's already starting to blend a little too much for me, but I'm gonna wait until I get the other effects in to really make a decision here. So the next thing we should do is the crystal, which is the last part. And the crystal, I don't really want to do too much to it. I'm just gonna put curves on there. Just make it a little darker. So we're gonna keep that kind of dark. Now we want to add some overall effects. The first thing that I want to do is add these eyes in the background. I want them to glow and affect the things in the foreground. So to do that, we're going to make this thing that I call a glow mat. So I'm going to take my background element, duplicate it. I'm going to take shells and duplicate her. And then I'm going to take my crystal and just duplicate that. And I'm going to cut that version of my crystal out, paste it. And so I'm going to take the crystal duplication, the shells duplication, and the background duplication. I'm going to pre-comp those into my glow mat. This is just going to go on top of everything. For the crystal and for shells, I'm just going to put a black fill on them. So I'm going to turn that fill to black. I'm going to copy it, put it on shells. And for the background, I'm going to duplicate the background and I'm going to Lumimat it with itself. And let's see, and I'm going to put a black solid behind that. So Lumimatting it with itself, it's already just Lumimatting the brightest points. I'm going to push that even further by putting levels on the background duplication that it's Lumimatting itself with. And I'm going to just push that even further to make the brights brighter and the darks darker. And what that's going to do is just kind of solo the eyes out for me, which is exactly what I want. So that's going to give me my eyes as kind of their own separate layer. But because I put shells in the crystal in front of that, it's always going to matte, you know, just the eyes. So they're going to have something in front of them. So now that I have that by itself, I'm going to use our friend Deep Glow. And that's going to give me a really cool glow on these guys. I'm going to up the radius something higher, and my exposure, it's pretty fine. Let's do 1.5. And then I'm going to add this on top of everything. See, so what that's going to do is it's going to create these glows that, you know, when the foreground elements cross the glows. See, so you get these really nice natural light leaks on there, which look just awesome. But the only issue is that, you know, especially in the beginning here, our background has a blur, but, you know, our glow mat doesn't. So we're just going to copy that adjustment layer that has out of focus on there. I'm going to go into our glow mat and we're going to just put that over the two background layers like that so it matches. Bam. So even just looking at this, I can tell that Shells is a little too bright. Like her darkest points are a little too bright. So I'm going to just keep that same value, make it a little darker, something like that. But now she's starting to blend in with the background, which is not what we want. So to separate them out a little bit, I have a whole bunch of random light leaks and just stuff like that. I'm really particularly fond of this set that I have here. You know, it's just got some very basic, nice. And this is something that I'm going to use to separate her in the background. So by default, you know, it's a little too bright, it's a little too big. It's just, you know, we got to do a little bit of work on it to get it to be there. So we want this to match the camera move on Shells. I'm going to solo everything but these two layers of Shells and the background. So I'm going to screen this on top of our background, and I'm going to bring the brightest point there to hug the top of that. And we're going to actually do a very minimal you know, keyframe on here to kind of match what we did with our camera move in cinema. So I'm going to keyframe the scale of it. so that right here it stays like that, and then here it's a little bit, you know, closer. So it looks like we're kind of starting off in the beam of light that is, you know, being cast on shells and the crystal. So that should work just fine. I'm gonna do a very simple curve to it. Okay. And I'm gonna put some curves on there, just to kind of spice it up a little bit. Now, the whole purpose of this purple blowout thing is to separate her in the background. So as long as it's doing that, it's doing what it's supposed to. So I'm gonna unsolo those, put everything else back on. There we go, that looks pretty nice. We're getting close, you know, we're almost there. It's already looking pretty similar to the design board. We still need a bit more of a glow up top. Our image that we just put in, it's doing it, but it's not really taking it home. So that's where we're going to use Shine, which is a trap code plugin from Red Giant. And Shine is wonderful. Shine, you know, if you haven't used it, it creates these awesome God rays, which you can just use 2D mats to define, and it creates a very cool 3D volumetric feel. So I try to use those all the time. So we're gonna do something kind of similar that we did. We're gonna duplicate our glow mat, reveal layer, source and project. I'm gonna duplicate that glow mat, and I'm gonna call this a shine mat. And the reason I duplicated it is because I wanna go inside and do things a little bit differently in here. So this time I'm not going to Luma the background. I'm just gonna leave it as is. I'm gonna keep these two mats the same, and I'm gonna take a black solid and I'm gonna put it over everything, and I'm gonna create kind of this pretty harsh vignette around everything, and just so it falls off to complete black. Because what that's gonna do is it's gonna help kind of make it so the shine layers, the God rays, only appear as a beam in the middle, so that we can focus on shells and on the crystal. So that's gonna sit just like that, and I'm gonna use shine on top of there. By default, shine's gonna come out right in the middle. You know, you move it around, you can start to see what it does. It's taking the brightest points and it's masking with the darkest points. So it's creating this really cool lighting effect already. I'm gonna bring it right on top like this. So it looks like it's shining down on them. That's what we want. So it's red right now, which is not what we want. So we'll go to colorize and we'll set the color to none. And that's just gonna take the colors of the scene and use those, which is ideal. I want it to be a little bit brighter. So we're gonna up our boost light a little bit so it looks like it comes out at the top. And our ray length, we're gonna drop that just a little bit. We don't need a boost like that's that intense. So we're just gonna go to the last frame to dial this in. So we're already getting a lot of these really cool bright spots on here, which is super stylized and cool looking. So I'm gonna go to my source opacity and drop that, and it just creates the beams by themselves. It doesn't actually show the matte through there, which is tight. So then I'm just going to add that on top, and bam, we got a pretty cool looking glowing effect just coming from the middle of the frame. Now I want to tighten up the edges just a little bit because, you know, still it's not centralized enough for me. So I'm gonna do something like that and bring the top of this up a little bit and drop the feather and bring it in just a little bit more. There we go. Okay, so it's a little more focused now, which looks great. All right, so I've done a little bit of extra work in comp. I've received some assets for, you know, some glows on the crystal, and I've also replaced her CG hair with cell animated hair. I'm kind of short on time, so I'm not gonna go through everything that I did to get those elements in there, but I'll show you what it looks like. Pretty cool, right? You know, it's just about there. The last thing that it really needs is a final pass of color correction. So to do that, I like to use Magic Bullet Looks, which is from Red Giant also. So in the Magic Bullet suite, there's a element called Looks, and this is kind of what I use on everything. At the very end, this is what I do. It's like my favorite color correction software. So it gives you a bunch of tools for, you know, footage, animation, whatever it is, just to do your final grade, color matching, rebalance, whatever it is you want. And it also comes with a ton of presets, like really good presets that will get you most of the way there. You know, you can already dramatically see the difference that it's having on the comp. You know, it's like it's really just affecting it a lot, you know. So I'll start with something like this that I think works well, and then I'll kind of go through and figure out what each tool is doing and if I even need all of them. So I'm going to go through and solo each one. So the first one is Cosmo. Doesn't look like it's doing anything, so I'll delete it. Second one is Diffusion, which is just a nice glow. You know, it's an extra type of glow that you can use. Just adjust that a little bit. There we go. Cool. And then HSL Color. Doesn't look like it's doing much either. It's kind of changing my blue highlights. Don't need it, delete it. Colorista is a really cool three-way color grade system. So it gives you your shadows, your midtones, and your highlights, and it lets you adjust the saturation of your shadows. Same thing with your midtones and your highlights. It also allows you to adjust the lightness on this side, and then the hue in the middle, which is cool. So you can tint your shadows, midtones, highlights however you want. It looks like the preset that came in is doing a split complementary system between these teal shadows and orange midtones. So I like what it's doing to the color. I'll leave it. No reason to change it. And then the last thing, it looks like it just has an S-curve on there. So that's just creating some curves that will darken my shadows and blow out my highlights, which lends to the stylized look. So honestly, that's good for me. That's plenty. Hit done, and that's it. Before and after. Huge difference, right? All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. It's been a blast going through this stuff and being able to share some of my techniques with you guys. Thank you very much to Maxon and C4D for bringing me on to such a cool event and, you know, inviting me out here. And, you know, feel free to reach out to me anytime, you guys. Like, I'm always happy to collaborate with people. I'm always, you know, happy to walk people through stuff, you know, provide some answers or demystify things that I can. You know, if you have any extra questions for me or comments, just feel free to hit my line. My email is here, as well as my portfolio, my Instagram, and my Twitter. So feel free to give me a follow. Thanks again, guys.